The knock came at 3:42 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Not the usual rhythmic pattern of his 8-year-old triplet daughters returning from school, but something urgent, desperate. When Marcus Thompson opened the front door of his modest, 2-story home in Cedar Falls, Ohio, he expected to see Emma, Sophia, and Isabella with their usual collection of scraped knees, grass stains, and stories about playground adventures. Instead, he found his 3 daughters huddled together on the front porch, their matching pink backpacks forgotten on the ground, their faces streaked with tears and dirt. And nestled in Emma's trembling arms, wrapped in what looked like a torn yellow blanket, was a baby. A real, living, breathing baby that couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. "Daddy," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the autumn wind rustling through the maple trees lining Elmwood Street. "We found her. She was all alone and she was crying and we didn't know what else to do." Marcus Thompson had been a single father for 3 years, ever since his wife Rebecca had died in a car accident that shattered their world into a million irreparable pieces. He thought he'd seen every possible crisis that could arise from raising 3 identical daughters alone. He'd handled broken bones, lost teeth, friendship drama, and the heart-wrenching questions about why Mommy couldn't come back. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this moment. His hands shaking, Marcus reached for his phone and dialed 911, his mind racing with questions he couldn't begin to answer. Where had his daughters found this baby? How long had they been carrying her? And most importantly, what kind of person abandons an infant where 3 8-year-old girls could stumble across her? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The story began 3 hours earlier, when Emma, Sophia, and Isabella Thompson had taken their usual route home from Cedar Falls Elementary School. The triplets were known throughout their neighborhood as inseparable. 3 identical faces, with the same chestnut brown hair, the same bright green eyes that had been their mother's, and the same stubborn determination that definitely came from their father's side of the family. Marcus had always marveled at how different his daughters were. Despite sharing the same DNA, Emma was the leader, the one who made decisions and took charge when situations required direction. She was the first to speak up in class, the first to defend her sisters when other kids made comments about them looking exactly alike, and the first to notice when something wasn't quite right in their small world. Sophia was the peacemaker, the diplomat who could smooth over arguments between her sisters and negotiate compromises that somehow left everyone feeling heard and valued. She had an intuitive understanding of emotions that seemed far beyond her 8 years, often knowing exactly what to say when someone was hurting or scared. Isabella was the observer, the quiet one who noticed details that others missed and remembered. Conversations long after everyone else had forgotten them. She was the sister who could tell you what Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down had been wearing on Tuesday morning, or exactly how many steps it took to walk from their front door to the school playground. On this particular Tuesday, the girls had lingered longer than usual at the school playground. It was one of those perfect October afternoons, when the air was crisp but not cold, when the leaves were just beginning to turn brilliant shades of orange and red, and when the sun slanted through the trees in that golden way that made everything look like a painting. They'd been playing their favorite game, a complex, imaginative scenario involving princesses, dragons, and a kingdom that needed saving, when Isabella had noticed something unusual near the old oak tree at the far edge of the school property. The tree sat just beyond the official playground boundaries in a small patch of woods that separated the school from the residential neighborhood behind it. "There's something by the tree," Isabella had said, pointing toward the massive oak whose trunk was so wide that all 3 girls couldn't wrap their arms around it even when they tried together. "Something that doesn't belong there." Emma, always ready to investigate, had immediately started walking toward the tree, with Sophia and Isabella close behind. As they got closer, they could hear it, a sound that made all three girls stop in their tracks. Crying. Not the loud, demanding cry of a toddler having a tantrum, but the weak, desperate sound of someone very small and very helpless. "Is that a baby?" Sophia had whispered, her voice filled with the kind of awe and concern that only children possess when encountering something both wonderful and frightening. The baby was lying in a small depression at the base of the oak tree, partially hidden by fallen leaves and wrapped in a blanket that had once been yellow, but was now stained with dirt and moisture. They could tell it was a girl from the tiny pink onesie visible beneath the blanket, couldn't have been there very long, because she was still crying with enough strength to make her distress known to anyone who came close enough to listen. Emma, who had never hesitated when someone needed help, had immediately knelt down and carefully lifted the baby into her arms. The infant was so small, so fragile, that Emma felt a surge of protective instinct she'd never experienced before. This wasn't like caring for a doll or even helping with a neighbor's pet. This was a real person, a tiny human being who was completely dependent on whatever kindness the world might offer. "We have to take her home," Emma had said with the kind of certainty that brooked no argument. "We can't leave her here alone." Sophia had looked around nervously, as if expecting to see adults nearby who might explain how a baby had ended up abandoned in the woods behind their school. "But what if her mommy comes back looking for her? What if we're not supposed to move her?" Isabella, who had been studying the scene with her characteristic attention to detail, had shaken her head slowly. "Nobody's coming back," she'd said with quiet conviction. "Look at how she's wrapped up. Look at where she was placed. Someone put her here and left her, but they put her where she might be found. They wanted someone to find her." The three girls had stood there for several minutes, holding the baby and trying to process what they'd discovered. They were only 8 years old, but they understood enough about the world to know that babies didn't end up alone in the woods by accident. Someone had made a decision, whether out of desperation, fear, or circumstances they couldn't imagine, to leave this tiny person where she might be discovered by someone who would care for her. "Daddy will know what to do," Emma had finally said, adjusting her grip on the baby and starting to walk toward the path that led home. "Daddy always knows what to do." The walk home had been unlike any other journey the triplets had ever made. Usually, their route from school was filled with chatter about their day, arguments about whose turn it was to choose the music when they got home, and stops to examine interesting rocks, leaves, or bugs they encountered along the way. Today, they walked in relative silence, taking turns carrying the baby when Emma's arms got tired, speaking in whispers so they wouldn't disturb the infant who had finally stopped crying and seemed to be sleeping peacefully despite the unusual circumstances of her rescue. As they walked, each girl found herself thinking about what they'd discovered and what it might mean. Emma felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. She'd made the decision to pick up the baby, to bring her home, and now she was committed to making sure everything turned out all right. Sophia worried about the baby's mother, wondering what kind of desperate situation would lead someone to leave their child in the woods. She imagined scenarios, some frightening, some sad, that might explain how they'd ended up being the ones to find this tiny person who clearly needed help. Isabella found herself studying the baby's face, memorizing details that might be important. Later, the baby had dark hair and what looked like brown eyes during the brief moments when she'd been awake. She was small, but didn't appear to be sick or injured, just hungry and probably frightened by whatever had led to her abandonment. By the time they reached Elmwood Street, all three girls understood that their discovery would change everything. They couldn't simply walk into their house, show their father what they'd found, and expect life to continue as normal. This baby represented a crisis that would require adult intervention, official involvement, and decisions that were far beyond anything 8-year-olds should have to make. But as they approached their front door, Emma clutching the baby protectively against her chest, they also felt something else, a sense of purpose that came from knowing they'd done the right thing. They'd found someone who needed help, and they'd provided it. Whatever happened next, they'd given this tiny person a chance at safety and care that she wouldn't have had if they'd walked past the old oak tree without investigating Isabella's observation. Marcus Thompson was in his home office, finishing up a report for his job at the county engineering department, when he heard the urgent knocking at the front door. He'd been expecting his daughters home from school any minute. But the sound wasn't their usual pattern of arrival. Something was different, something that made him set aside his work and hurry downstairs with a growing sense of unease. When he opened the door and saw his 3 daughters standing there with tears in their eyes and a baby in Emma's arms, Marcus felt the world shift beneath his feet in a way he hadn't experienced since the day Rebecca died. In that instant, he knew that whatever had brought this infant into their lives was going to challenge everything he thought he understood about being a single father, about protecting his daughters, and about the kind of situations that ordinary families could find themselves facing on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The emergency dispatcher's voice was calm and professional, a stark contrast to the chaos Marcus felt swirling in his mind as he tried to explain the impossible situation unfolding in his living room. "What's your emergency?" "My daughters. They found a baby, an abandoned baby. She's here in my house right now, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Marcus ran his free hand through his dark hair, a nervous habit he'd developed since Rebecca's death. Through the doorway, he could see Emma still holding the infant, while Sophia and Isabella hovered nearby, their faces etched with worry and confusion. "Sir, can you confirm the location where you're calling from?" 1247 Elmwood Street, Cedar Falls, Ohio. "My name is Marcus Thompson." He provided his phone number and other basic information while watching his daughters, noting how carefully Emma supported the baby's head, how gently Sophia was trying to clean dirt smudges from the infant's face with a tissue. "Mr. Thompson, can you tell me about the condition of the baby? Is she breathing normally? Does she appear to be injured?" Marcus moved closer to get a better look. The baby seemed alert, her dark eyes open and moving, tracking sounds and faces. "She appears to be okay. She's awake, breathing fine, maybe a few weeks old. She's dirty and the blanket she was wrapped in is pretty filthy, but I don't see any obvious injuries." "And where exactly did your daughters find this infant?" "Near the old oak tree behind Cedar Falls Elementary." "That's what they told me." Marcus glanced at Emma, who nodded confirmation. "They were walking home from school and heard crying." The dispatcher continued gathering information, while Marcus found himself studying his daughters' faces. In the 3 years since Rebecca's death, he'd become an expert at reading their emotions, understanding the subtle differences in how each girl processed stress and uncertainty. Emma was in full protective mode, her jaw set with determination that reminded him painfully of his late wife. Sophia kept biting her lower lip, a telltale sign that she was worried about everyone involved: the baby, her sisters, even him. Isabella stood slightly apart, her green eyes taking in every detail of the room, the phone conversation, the baby's movements, filing it all away in that remarkable memory of hers. "Mr. Thompson, I'm dispatching both police and child protective services to your location. They should arrive within 15 to 20 minutes. In the meantime, do you have any formula or baby supplies in the house?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Baby supplies. He hadn't needed those in 8 years, not since the triplets. had outgrown diapers and bottles, and moved into the relatively straightforward world of elementary school problems. Rebecca had donated all their baby items to charity years ago, back when they'd still been a complete family, back when they'd sometimes talked about having another child someday. "No," he said quietly. "No baby supplies. We haven't needed them in years." Is the infant showing signs of distress, crying, fussiness, anything that might indicate immediate needs? Marcus looked more closely at the baby in Emma's arms. She was awake but calm, occasionally making the small sounds that infants make but not crying. "She seems peaceful right now, maybe a little hungry. I honestly don't know what to look for. Sir, if she becomes fussy or seems hungry, you can offer her small amounts of water from a clean spoon. Don't give her milk or formula unless you have infant formula specifically. The responding officers will have emergency supplies if needed." After ending the call, Marcus found himself in his living room, facing 3 pairs of identical green eyes that held identical expressions of anxious hope. His daughters were waiting for him to take charge, to fix this situation the way he'd learned to fix everything else in their lives since Rebecca died. But this was different from helping with homework, or negotiating playground disputes, or explaining why Mommy couldn't come to school concerts anymore. "What did they say, Daddy?" Sophia asked, moving closer to him with the instinctive need for comfort that still sometimes caught him off guard. Even at 8, his daughters occasionally reverted to the clingy behavior they'd exhibited in the months immediately following their mother's death. "Police officers are coming, and someone from Child Protective Services. They'll know how to help." "This little girl." Marcus sat down on the couch, and Isabella immediately climbed up beside him, tucking herself under his arm in the way she did when the world felt too big and uncertain. "Are we in trouble?" Emma asked, still holding the baby but looking worried for the first time since they'd arrived home. "Were we supposed to leave her there? Were we supposed to find a grown-up first?" The question broke Marcus's heart because it revealed how much responsibility his 8-year-old daughter had taken on herself. Emma had always been the leader among the triplets, but since Rebecca's death, she'd also become something of a third parent, helping to care for her sisters, and anticipating their needs in ways that no child should have to manage. "You're not in trouble, sweetheart. You did exactly the right thing. You found someone who needed help, and you brought her somewhere safe. That's what good people do." Marcus reached over and smoothed Emma's hair, the same gesture he'd made thousands of times over the years. "The police just need to understand what happened so they can figure out how to help her find a permanent home." "What if her mommy comes looking for her?" Sophia asked, voicing the concern that had been troubling her during their walk home. "What if her mommy made a mistake and didn't mean to leave her?" It was Isabella who answered, her voice quiet but certain. "Her mommy put her where someone would find her. If she wanted her back, she would have stayed. She wanted someone to take care of her baby, but she couldn't do it herself." Marcus was constantly amazed by Isabella's ability to understand complex situations that should have been beyond her years. Of all his daughters, she was the one who seemed to grasp the emotional undercurrents of adult problems, even when she couldn't articulate solutions. "That might be true," Marcus said carefully, "but we don't know the whole story yet. Maybe her mommy is in trouble and needs help too. The police will investigate and try to find out what happened." The next 20 minutes felt like hours. Marcus made sandwiches that none of them felt like eating, while the girls took turns holding the baby, who remained remarkably calm, considering the unusual circumstances. Emma proved to have a natural instinct for infant care, supporting the baby's head properly and speaking to her in soft, soothing tones. Sophia entertained the infant with gentle sounds and faces, while Isabella simply observed occasionally. Reporting on details she noticed. "She has a tiny birthmark on her left hand," Isabella announced, "and her fingernails are really long. Daddy, why are her fingernails so long?" "Babies' fingernails grow fast, and they can't cut them themselves," Marcus explained, though he found Isabella's observations both helpful and heartbreaking. Someone should have been caring for this baby's basic needs. Someone should have been trimming those tiny nails and keeping her clean and fed and loved. When the police cruiser pulled into their driveway, followed by an unmarked sedan that Marcus assumed belonged to Child Protective Services, he felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Help was arriving, but he also knew that once official agencies became involved, the situation would move beyond his control. Officer Patricia Rodriguez was in her 40s, with graying hair and the kind of patient demeanor that suggested extensive experience with family crises. She introduced herself and her partner, Officer James Mitchell, a younger man who immediately knelt down to the triplets' eye level when he entered the living room. "You must be the young ladies who found the baby," Officer Mitchell said, his voice gentle and encouraging. "That was very brave of you. Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Marcus watched as his daughters took turns explaining their discovery, each adding details that the others missed, their voices growing more confident as they realized the officers were treating them as credible witnesses rather than children who had somehow gotten in the way of adult business. Sarah Chen, from Child Protective Services, arrived shortly after the police, a soft-spoken woman in her 30s who carried a large bag that Marcus assumed contained emergency baby supplies. She examined the infant with professional efficiency while asking questions about the exact location and circumstances of the discovery. "She appears to be healthy," Sarah reported after a thorough check, "maybe 3 to 4 weeks old, showing no signs of abuse or neglect beyond being abandoned. She's alert and responsive, good muscle tone, normal reflexes. Someone has been caring for her properly until very recently." The baby had begun to fuss during the examination, making small, hungry sounds that tugged at Marcus's heart. He remembered that sound from when the triplets were infants, the way Rebecca had always seemed, to know exactly what each cry meant and how to respond appropriately. "She's probably hungry," Sarah continued, pulling a bottle and formula from her bag. "Would one of you girls like to help me feed her?" Emma volunteered immediately, settling into the armchair with the kind of careful attention she brought to everything important. Under Sarah's guidance, she positioned the bottle correctly and began feeding the infant, her face glowing with pride and tenderness as the baby eagerly accepted the formula. Officer Rodriguez had been taking notes throughout the examination and feeding. "Mr. Thompson, we'll need to canvass the area where your daughters found her, see if there are any witnesses or evidence that might help us understand how she ended up there. In the meantime, what happens to her now?" Sarah looked up from where she was helping Emma with the bottle. "She'll need to go into emergency foster care tonight while we begin the process of investigating her abandonment and looking for family members. We have several excellent emergency foster families who specialize in infant care." Marcus felt something twist in his chest at the thought of this tiny person who had already been abandoned once, being handed off to strangers, no matter how well-meaning and qualified they might be. His daughters had found her, had brought her to safety, had already begun forming the protective bonds that seemed to come naturally to the Thompson family. What if, Marcus began, then stopped, unsure if what he was thinking made any sense at all. What if she stayed here tonight, just until you can make more permanent arrangements? The room fell silent, except for the soft sounds of the baby taking her bottle. Sarah and Officer Rodriguez exchanged glances that Marcus couldn't interpret, while his daughters looked at him with expressions of hope and surprise. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah said carefully, "that's a generous offer, but caring for an infant is a significant responsibility, especially under these circumstances. You'd need to be approved as an emergency foster placement. Background checks would need to be expedited, and frankly, you already have your hands full with 3 children. But we found her, Emma said quietly, not looking up from the baby she was feeding. "We brought her home because we thought she'd be safe here. Doesn't that count for something?" Marcus looked at his daughter, this 8-year-old who had spent the afternoon shouldering adult responsibilities and making life-changing decisions, and felt a surge of pride mixed with protective concern. Emma had already invested herself emotionally in this infant's welfare. They all had, in their own ways. The next few hours would determine not just what happened to an abandoned baby, but how his family would understand their role in her story and what obligations came with being the people who had chosen to help. When help was desperately needed, the emergency foster placement approval process that should have taken weeks was compressed into 3 hours of phone calls, expedited background checks, and what Sarah Chen diplomatically called exceptional circumstances review. By 8 p.m. that Tuesday evening, Marcus Thompson found himself officially licensed as a temporary emergency foster parent with a sleeping infant in a borrowed crib in what had been his home office. The transformation of his quiet, ordered household into something resembling a crisis management center had happened with bewildering speed. His dining room table was covered with official forms, emergency contact numbers, and a thick folder of instructions about infant care that he hadn't needed to reference in 8 years. The triplets had been excused from their usual homework, routine, and were instead helping to baby-proof rooms that hadn't needed child-proofing since they were toddlers themselves. "Daddy, she needs a name," Sophia announced from her position on the living room floor, where she was sorting through donated baby clothes that a neighbor had hurriedly brought over after hearing about their situation. "We can't just keep calling her the baby, or her. She's a person." Marcus looked up from the instruction manual he'd been studying, a guide to mixing formula and establishing feeding schedules that felt both familiar and completely foreign. The social worker said they'll assign her a temporary name for the official paperwork until they can determine her real identity. "That's not the same thing," Emma protested. She had appointed herself as the infant's primary caregiver and hadn't strayed far from the borrowed crib since the baby had been settled for the night. She needs a name that belongs to her, not just some random thing from a list. Isabella, who had been unusually quiet during the evening's chaos, looked up from the corner where she'd been reading one of the child development books that Sarah had left behind. "What about Hope?" she said simply. "Because we found her, and now she has hope for a better life." The suggestion hung in the air with the weight of childhood wisdom that sometimes cuts straight to the heart of adult complexity. Marcus felt his throat tighten as he looked at his youngest daughter, younger than Emma by 4 minutes, but often the most intuitive of the three, and realized she had articulated something he hadn't been able to put into words himself. "Hope," he repeated quietly. "I think that's perfect." The next morning brought Detective Linda Walsh, a woman in her early 50s, with kind eyes and the sort of patient persistence that Marcus imagined was essential for investigating cases involving children. She sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, asking detailed questions about the exact location where the triplets had found Hope, the condition of the blanket she'd been wrapped in, and any details they might have noticed about the surrounding area. "The preliminary examination of the scene didn't turn up much," Detective Walsh explained, making notes in a small notebook. "No obvious signs of disturbance, no personal items left behind, no witnesses so far. Whoever left her there was careful not to leave evidence behind." Emma, who had been listening intently while giving Hope her morning bottle, looked up with the serious expression she wore when processing important information. "Does that mean her mommy is in trouble with the police?" "Not necessarily, sweetheart," Detective Walsh replied, her tone gentle but honest. "Abandoning a baby is against the law, but we understand that sometimes people make desperate choices when they're facing impossible situations. Our goal is to understand what happened and make sure everyone involved gets the help they need." The detective spent nearly an hour with the triplets, asking them to walk through their discovery step by step, encouraging them to remember details that might seem unimportant but could provide crucial clues. Marcus was struck by how professionally she treated his daughters, respecting their observations and taking their testimony seriously. "You girls did something very brave," Detective Walsh told them before leaving. "Finding Hope and bringing her somewhere safe probably saved her life. Not everyone would have had the courage to take responsibility for someone else's welfare the way you did." After the detective left, Marcus found himself alone with his daughters and Hope, for the first time since the previous afternoon's chaos. The house felt different, quieter in some ways, but also filled with a new kind of energy that came from caring for someone completely dependent on their attention and kindness. The practical challenges of infant care came flooding back with surprising intensity. Hope needed to be fed every 3 hours, changed regularly, and monitored constantly for signs of distress or illness. Marcus had forgotten how exhausting it could be to structure an entire day around the needs of someone who couldn't communicate, except through crying, and required complete assistance with every basic function. But watching his daughters adapt to their new responsibilities was both heartwarming and concerning. Emma had seamlessly transitioned into the role of big sister, anticipating Hope's needs and handling feeding and diaper changes with remarkable competence. Sophia had become the entertainment committee, singing lullabies and making silly faces that consistently elicited what might have been baby smiles. Isabella maintained her role as observer and reporter, noting patterns in Hope's sleep schedule and documenting milestones that might be important for her medical care. The concern came from realizing how quickly his 8-year-old daughters had accepted responsibility for an infant's welfare. They approached caring for Hope with the same determination they'd shown after Rebecca's death, when they'd instinctively understood that their family needed to pull together to survive the crisis. But they were still children themselves, and Marcus worried about the emotional burden they were taking on. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Dr. Amanda Foster from Cedar Falls Pediatric Clinic had volunteered to provide medical care for Hope while she was in emergency placement. She was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in her early 30s, with the kind of warm, competent manner that immediately put both children and adults at ease. "I wanted to do a thorough examination and establish baseline health records," Dr. Foster explained as she set up her portable equipment in the living room. "Emergency placements can be challenging medically because we often don't have access to birth records or early medical history." The examination revealed what Sarah Chen had suspected the previous evening. Hope was a healthy infant, approximately 4 weeks old, showing no signs of abuse, neglect, or medical problems. Her reflexes were normal, her weight was appropriate for her estimated age, and she responded well to stimulation and interaction. "Someone has been caring for her properly until very recently," Dr. Foster confirmed, echoing Sarah's earlier assessment. "She's been fed regularly, kept clean, and shows signs of having received appropriate medical care after birth. This wasn't a case of long-term neglect. Something happened recently that made continued care impossible." Marcus found this information both reassuring and troubling. It suggested that Hope's abandonment hadn't been the result of indifference or inability to care for an infant, but rather some sort of crisis or change in circumstances that had made keeping her impossible. "What does that mean for finding her family?" Marcus asked. "It means whoever cared for her initially may still be traceable through medical records if she received proper prenatal care and hospital delivery. Detective Walsh is working with area hospitals to check birth records from the past month, looking for mothers who might match the timeline." The mention of Hope's mother brought up questions that Marcus had been avoiding since the previous afternoon. Somewhere there was a woman who had carried this baby for 9 months, given birth to her, cared for her for several weeks, and then made the devastating decision to leave her where she might be found by strangers. What kind of circumstances would drive someone to that choice? That evening, after Hope had been fed and settled for the night, Marcus found himself having the conversation with his daughters that he'd been dreading since Detective Walsh's visit. They needed to understand that this arrangement was temporary, that Hope would eventually be placed with a permanent family, and that their role as her rescuers didn't automatically make them her permanent family. "Girls, we need to talk about Hope's future," he began, sitting down in the living room where they'd been playing a quiet board game. "You know that we're only taking care of her temporarily, right? Until the authorities can find her a permanent home." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Emma was the first to respond, her voice carefully controlled in the way that meant she was trying not to cry. "We know, Daddy, but what if they can't find her real family? What if no one wants to adopt a baby who was abandoned?" "There are lots of families who want to adopt babies," Marcus said gently. "Hope won't have trouble finding people who want to love her and give her a good home." "But we already love her," Sophia said quietly, "and she knows us now. Wouldn't it be scary for her to have to go live with strangers?" Isabella, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "Are we going to adopt her, Daddy? Are we going to be her real family?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, forcing Marcus to confront possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider seriously. Could he adopt Hope? Should he? Was providing emergency foster care the beginning of a longer commitment, or was he setting his daughters up for heartbreak by allowing them to become too attached to a baby who would inevitably leave their lives? "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "Adoption is a huge decision that would change our entire family. We'd need to think about it very carefully, and there would be a long process of evaluation and approval." "But you're thinking about it?" Emma asked, hope creeping into her voice despite her efforts to sound casual. Marcus looked at his three daughters, these remarkable little girls who had found an abandoned baby, and immediately understood that their job was to provide safety and care until something better could be arranged, who had adapted to the demands of infant care without complaint, who had taken on responsibilities that many adults would find overwhelming, who had opened their hearts to someone who needed love without worrying about whether that love would be returned or recognized. "Yes," he said quietly, "I'm thinking about it." The admission felt like crossing a bridge he couldn't see the other side of, but as he looked around his living room, now equipped with a crib and baby supplies, filled with the soft sounds of an infant sleeping peacefully, Marcus realized that some bridges were worth crossing even when you couldn't predict where they might lead. 3 days into their new routine with Hope, Marcus received a phone call that changed everything. He was in the kitchen preparing bottles for the day ahead while the triplets got ready for school, a morning choreography they'd perfected with surprising efficiency. Hope was napping in her bouncy seat, and for a brief moment the house felt like it had found its new normal. "Mr. Thompson, this is Detective Walsh. We've had a development in Hope's case. I need to come over and speak with you and your daughters as soon as possible." The gravity in the detective's voice made Marcus's stomach drop. "Did you find her mother? Is everything all right? I'd rather discuss this in person, if that's okay. Can I come by after your daughters get home from school today?" Marcus spent the entire day distracted, going through the motions of his work-from-home engineering job, while his mind raced through possibilities. Had they found Hope's biological family? Was someone coming to claim her? Had there been complications that would affect her placement with his family? When Detective Walsh arrived that afternoon, she wasn't alone. A woman in her late 20s accompanied her, petite, with dark hair and nervous eyes that immediately sought out Hope, who was lying on a playmat in the living room, batting at colorful toys suspended above her. "Mr. Thompson, girls," Detective Walsh began, "I'd like you to meet Jessica Martinez. Jessica has some information about Hope that I think you need to hear." Jessica Martinez looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hands trembled slightly as she sat down on the edge of the couch, never taking her eyes off Hope. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "She's my sister." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Emma, who had been feeding Hope, stopped mid-motion. Sophia and Isabella moved closer to their father instinctively, sensing the emotional weight of whatever was about to unfold. "Your sister?" Marcus repeated, trying to process this information. "You mean Hope is your sister?" Jessica nodded, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "Her name is Lily Martinez. She's my little sister, and I've been looking for her for 4 days." Detective Walsh opened her notebook and began explaining what their investigation had uncovered. "Jessica came to us yesterday after hearing news reports about a baby being found. She'd been searching hospitals, shelters, anywhere she could think of trying to locate her sister and their mother. Where is your mother?" Sophia asked, with the directness that only children possess when confronted with confusing adult situations. Jessica's composure crumbled completely. "She's dead. Our mother died 3 days ago from complications related to drug addiction. I was out of town for work when it happened, and when I got back to check on them, the apartment was empty. I found a note saying she'd left Lily somewhere safe, but she didn't say where." The room fell silent except for Hope, Lily, making the small, contented sounds of a baby who was unaware that her world was being redefined around her. Marcus felt his heart breaking for this young woman who had lost her mother and spent days searching for her infant sister, not knowing if she was safe or even alive. "I work as a traveling nurse," Jessica continued, struggling to compose herself. "I've been away for 2 weeks. I knew Mom was struggling, but I hoped she was managing okay. I sent money. I called every few days, but I didn't realize how bad things had gotten." Emma, who had been listening with the intense focus she brought to all serious situations, spoke up quietly. "You want to take her home with you?" It wasn't a question, and Jessica's answer confirmed what they all understood was coming. "She's my family. She's all the family I have left." Jessica looked directly at Emma, recognizing her as Lily's primary caregiver over the past few days. "I know you've been taking good care of her. I can see how healthy and happy she looks. But she belongs with me." Detective Walsh intervened gently. "It's not quite that simple, Jessica. While you are Lily's biological aunt and closest living relative, there are legal procedures that need to be followed. You'll need to be approved for custody, background checks completed, living situation evaluated." "How long will that take?" Marcus asked, surprising himself by speaking up. Part of him wanted to argue that Hope, Lily, should stay where she was safe and loved, but he also understood that this young woman had a legitimate claim and had been desperately searching for her sister. Typically, several weeks at minimum. But given the circumstances and Jessica's relationship to the child, it could be expedited. Jessica looked around the room, taking in the baby supplies, the triplets' obvious attachment to Lily, the warm, stable environment that Marcus had created. Could she stay here while the paperwork gets processed? "I can see she's happy here, and honestly, I don't have a place set up for a baby yet. I wasn't prepared for this." The request hung in the air, creating a strange dynamic where everyone wanted what was best for Lily, but no one was quite sure what that looked like in practical terms. "I'd like that," Marcus found himself saying. "If it would help, and if the authorities approve it, Hope, Lily, can stay here until you're ready for her." Isabella, who had been observing Jessica with her characteristic intensity, asked the question that had been bothering her. "Why did your mom leave Lily in the woods instead of calling you?" Jessica wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. "I think she was ashamed. She'd been struggling with addiction for years, and she knew I'd been worried about her ability to care. For a baby, She probably thought I'd be angry, or that I'd try to take Lily away from her. She might have been too proud to ask for help, or too scared that she'd get in trouble. But you would have helped, Sophia said with certainty. You would have taken care of both of them. Yes, Jessica whispered. I would have done anything to help them. I just wish she'd trusted me enough to call. The next hour was spent working out logistics. Jessica would begin the formal custody process immediately, but Lily would remain with the Thompson family during the transition period. Jessica would visit daily, gradually taking on more caregiving responsibilities as she prepared her living situation for an infant. Dr. Foster was called to oversee the medical aspects of the transition, ensuring that Lily's care remained consistent, and that Jessica learned her feeding schedule, sleep patterns, and behavioral cues. Sarah Chen would coordinate the legal aspects and provide support services to help Jessica prepare for single parenthood. As the officials and Jessica prepared to leave, Emma approached Lily's biological aunt with the serious demeanor she adopted. When something was really important to her, she likes to be held when she gets fussy in the evening, Emma said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. And she sleeps better if you sing to her. She doesn't like loud noises, but she likes music. We've been calling her Hope, but I think Lily is a pretty name too. Jessica knelt down to Emma's eye level, recognizing the enormity of what this 8-year-old was doing. Thank you for taking such good care of her. Thank you for bringing her home when she needed help. I don't know how to repay you for that. You don't need to repay us, Isabella said matter-of-factly. We did what anyone should do when they find someone who needs help. After everyone left, Marcus found himself alone with his daughters in a house that suddenly felt different again. The baby supplies were still there. Lily was still napping in her crib, but the certainty they'd begun to feel about their future as a family of 5 had been replaced by the knowledge that this was truly temporary. Are you sad? Sophia asked, climbing into Marcus's lap with the directness that meant she needed comfort and reassurance. I'm lots of things, Marcus admitted. Sad that Hope, Lily, won't be staying with us permanently. Happy that she has family who loves her and wants to care for her. Proud of all of you for handling this situation with such maturity and kindness. Will we still see her sometimes? Emma asked, her voice carefully controlled. I don't know, sweetheart. That will be up to Jessica, but I hope so. I think she understands how much you girls care about Lily and how good you've been for each other. That night, as Marcus tucked his daughters into bed, each of them had questions about what the next few weeks would look like. How long would Lily stay with them? Would Jessica be a good mother? What would happen to their family after Lily left? Sometimes, Marcus told them, we don't get to keep the people we love, but that doesn't mean loving them was a mistake. You, girls, gave Lily safety and care when she needed it most. You'll always be part of her story, even if you're not part of her everyday life. Isabella, always the most thoughtful of the 3, looked up at him with wise eyes. Maybe that's what family really means. Not just the people who live with you, but the people who help you when you need it most. As Marcus turned off the lights and headed downstairs to check on Lily one more time before going to bed himself, he realized that his youngest daughter had articulated something profound about the nature of love, family, and the connections that bind people together even when circumstances pull them apart. The next few weeks would test everything they'd learned about resilience, generosity, and letting go. But tonight, they were still a family of 5, caring for each other and for a baby who had brought them together in ways they never could have imagined. Jessica's first official visit as Lily's guardian in transition happened on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after she'd first walked into the Thompson home. She arrived with a car full of baby supplies she'd been frantically purchasing, a crib, a stroller, enough diapers and formula to last months, and toys that were far too advanced for a 1-month-old infant. Marcus watched from the kitchen window. as she struggled to carry everything up the front walkway, clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was taking on. When he opened the door to help, he found Jessica surrounded by shopping bags and boxes, looking like she might cry from frustration. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted before he could even say hello. "I went to the baby store and just started buying things, but I have no idea if any of it is right. I've never taken care of a baby before. I don't even know if I'm holding her correctly." The vulnerability in her confession reminded Marcus of his own first days as a father, when the triplets were newborns and every decision felt monumental and potentially catastrophic. Rebecca had been the natural caregiver then, instinctively, understanding what their daughters needed, while he fumbled through diaper changes and worried constantly about doing everything wrong. "Nobody knows what they're doing at first," Marcus said gently, helping her carry supplies into the house. "Parenting isn't something you learn from books or classes. You figure it out by paying attention and trying your best." The triplets had been preparing for Jessica's visit all week, creating what Emma called Operation Lily Education, a comprehensive program to teach Jessica everything they'd learned about caring for their temporary baby sister. They'd made charts showing Lily's feeding schedule, compiled a list of her favorite songs, and even created illustrated instructions for the games that made her smile. Sophia had been particularly invested in the project, spending hours drawing pictures that showed proper bottle-holding technique and the exact angle that worked best for burping. Her natural empathy had extended to Jessica as much as to Lily, recognizing that this young woman was facing challenges that seemed almost insurmountable. Isabella had approached the situation with her characteristic attention to detail, documenting Lily's behavioral patterns and sleep cycles with scientific precision. She'd noticed that Lily slept longer after being fed at exactly 7 p.m., that she became fussy when there was too much stimulation, and that she responded best to gentle classical music rather than children's songs. "We made these for you," Emma announced, presenting Jessica with a thick folder containing all their research and observations. "So you'll know everything about taking care of Lily." Jessica accepted the folder with obvious emotion, flipping through pages of careful notes and detailed drawings. "You girls have been incredible," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "Lily is so lucky that you found her." The morning was spent with Jessica learning hands-on baby care under the triplets' patient instruction. She practiced changing diapers, while Sophia offered encouragement, learned to mix formula to Isabella's exact specifications, and received a comprehensive tutorial from Emma on recognizing different types of crying and what each one meant. Marcus found himself observing the interactions with growing respect for Jessica's determination. She was clearly terrified, making the kinds of nervous mistakes that all new parents make, but she listened carefully to every piece of advice and asked thoughtful questions about Lily's needs and preferences. "The hardest part," Jessica confided to Marcus while the girls were entertaining Lily in the living room, "is knowing that I'm taking her away from people who've become her family. You've all done such an amazing job with her, and she's so comfortable here. I keep wondering if I'm being selfish, if she'd be better off staying with you." The question hung between them, acknowledging the complicated emotions that everyone was struggling with. Marcus had been wondering the same thing, not whether Jessica was being selfish, but whether there might be a way for everyone to remain connected, for Lily to have both her biological family and the family that had rescued her. "Have you thought about what you want your living situation to look like long-term?" Marcus asked carefully. "Where you want to raise Lily, what kind of support system you want to build?" Jessica looked around the kitchen, taking in the evidence of a stable, loving home, the triplets' artwork on the refrigerator, the family photos covering one wall, the comfortable chaos of a household where children were clearly cherished and encouraged. "Honestly, I've been so focused on getting through the legal process that I haven't thought much beyond that. I know I want to give her a good life, but I'm not sure what that looks like yet. I'm a traveling nurse, which means good money but unpredictable schedules. I'd probably need to find a different job, something that would let me be home more consistently. Marcus found himself making a suggestion that surprised him even as he said it. What if you didn't have to figure it all out alone? Cedar Falls has a good hospital, and they're always looking for experienced nurses. You could stay in the area, let Lily maintain connections with the girls, have a support system while you adjust to being a single parent. The idea seemed to startle Jessica, as if she hadn't considered the possibility that moving to Cedar Falls might be an option. You'd want that? You'd want us to stay nearby? I think it would be good for everyone, Marcus said honestly. Lily has bonded with the girls, and they've bonded with her. Cutting those connections entirely seems unnecessarily harsh, especially when there might be ways to maintain them. That afternoon, while Jessica practiced feeding Lily and the triplets worked on homework at the kitchen table, Marcus found himself imagining what an extended relationship might look like. Jessica living nearby, bringing Lily over for regular visits. The girls maintaining their role as protective big sisters, everyone benefiting from continued connection rather than definitive separation. The arrangement that emerged over the following weeks was unlike anything any of them had expected when this journey began. Jessica found a position at Cedar Falls Regional Hospital and rented a small apartment 3 blocks from the Thompson house. She would take full custody of Lily, but with an informal agreement that allowed the girls to remain involved in their baby sister's life. It's like having an extended family, Emma explained to her best friend Madison when asked about the unusual situation. Lily lives with Jessica, but she's still our sister too. We help take care of her, and Jessica helps us understand how to be good big sisters. The transition wasn't without challenges. There were difficult nights when Lily was fussy and Jessica called Marcus in tears, not knowing how to soothe her. There were moments when the triplets struggled with jealousy, feeling displaced by Jessica's growing competence and confidence as Lily's primary caregiver. But there were also beautiful moments that none of them could have anticipated. Jessica, teaching the girls about their Mexican heritage, sharing stories about her and Lily's mother that helped the infant's history feel less tragic and more like a foundation for understanding her identity. The girls teaching Jessica about their own family traditions, gradually including her in their Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. Marcus found himself co-parenting in a way he'd never experienced, sharing responsibilities and decisions with someone who wasn't his spouse, but had become genuinely invested in his daughter's well-being. Jessica brought perspectives and experiences that enriched their family life, while benefiting from the stability and support that his household provided. I never expected this, Jessica told him one evening, as they watched the girls play with Lily in the backyard, all 4 children laughing at some game that only they understood. When I was searching for her, I was so focused on just finding her and keeping her safe. I never imagined that we'd find a whole family. Neither did I, Marcus admitted. 3 weeks ago, I thought I was raising 3 daughters in a pretty predictable life. Now I'm learning that family can expand in ways you never saw coming. The most remarkable change was in the triplets themselves. Taking care of Lily, then, learning to share that responsibility with Jessica, had taught them lessons about love, loss, and resilience that no classroom could have provided. They'd learned that helping someone didn't always mean keeping them, that family could include people who weren't related by blood, and that doing the right thing sometimes meant accepting outcomes you hadn't planned for. Emma had discovered leadership, skills she didn't know she possessed, becoming a bridge between Jessica and her sisters when communication got difficult. Sophia had developed her natural empathy into something approaching wisdom, often understanding what both Jessica and Lily needed before they could articulate it themselves. Isabella had learned to apply her observational skills to understanding relationships and emotions, not just facts and patterns. As summer approached and the arrangement had been in place for several months, Marcus realized that what had begun as an emergency foster placement had evolved into something much more significant. They'd created a new kind of family structure, one that honored biological connections while also recognizing the bonds formed through choice and circumstance. The girls were thriving in their roles as big sisters to a baby who lived nearby, but remained central to their daily lives. Jessica was growing into parenthood with the kind of support system that most single mothers could only dream of. And Marcus had discovered that opening his home to someone in crisis had enriched his own life in ways he never could have predicted. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with a simple decision to help someone who needs assistance, and end up transforming everyone involved in ways that were impossible to imagine at the beginning. The story of the triplet girls who found an abandoned baby and helped create an unconventional family had spread throughout Cedar Falls in the way that small-town news travels, through conversations at the grocery store, discussions at parent-teacher conferences, and social media posts that celebrated acts of kindness in an often harsh world. Marcus first became aware of their local fame when Mrs. Patterson, the school librarian, approached him during pickup one afternoon, with tears in her eyes and a story about how Emma had helped a kindergartner who was crying because she couldn't find her lunch money. "That little girl has such a big heart," Mrs. Patterson said, watching Emma walk toward the car with her sisters. "Ever since word got around about what your girls did with that baby, everyone's been noticing how naturally they help other people. It's like they have this instinct for recognizing when someone needs assistance." The attention wasn't always comfortable. Marcus had never sought publicity for his family, and he worried about his daughters becoming overwhelmed by expectations, or losing their natural spontaneity under the weight of being seen as local heroes. But the community response also brought unexpected opportunities and connections that enriched their lives in ways he hadn't anticipated. Cedar Falls Children's Hospital reached out to ask if the girls would be willing to visit the pediatric ward, occasionally sharing their story with young patients who might benefit from meeting children who understood what it meant to care for someone vulnerable. The visits became a monthly tradition, with Emma, Sophia, and Isabella bringing books, games, and their natural ability to connect with kids who were facing medical challenges. Isabella surprised everyone by becoming the most popular visitor, her quiet observation skills translating perfectly to understanding what hospitalized children needed most. She would sit with kids who were too sick to play active games, drawing pictures or reading stories, somehow knowing when to talk and when to simply provide comfortable companionship. Sophia's gift for emotional connection made her invaluable with children who were scared or homesick. She had an intuitive understanding of how to offer comfort without overwhelming vulnerable kids, often spending entire visits simply listening to young patients talk about their fears and hopes. Emma took on the role of activity coordinator, organizing games and projects that brought groups of children together, helping them focus on fun rather than their medical situations. Her natural leadership skills had evolved into something more sophisticated, the ability to create environments where everyone felt included and valued. The hospital visits led to other opportunities. The local community center asked if the girls would help with their after-school program for at-risk children, many of whom came from single-parent households or families struggling with economic hardship. Jessica, who had been looking for ways to give back to the community that had welcomed her, and Lily volunteered to help coordinate the program. "It's perfect," Jessica explained to Marcus as they watched the girls work with younger children on reading and homework. These kids understand what it's like to need help, and your daughters understand what it's like to provide it. Everyone benefits. The program became a cornerstone of their weekly routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, the triplets would walk from school to the community center, where they'd spend 2 hours helping elementary school children with homework, reading together, or simply playing games that built confidence and social skills. Marcus found himself volunteering as well, using his engineering background to help older kids with math and science projects. The center's director, Maria Santos, had created an environment where families supported each other across traditional boundaries, where single parents could find both practical assistance and emotional connection. "What your family started," Maria told Marcus one afternoon as they watched a dozen children work together on art projects, "has created ripple effects throughout our community. People are more aware of opportunities to help each other, more willing to get involved when they see someone struggling." The ripple effects were evident in unexpected places. Teachers at Cedar Falls Elementary began noticing increased empathy among students, more willingness to include classmates who seemed lonely or different. Parents reported conversations with their children about what it meant to help others, inspired by the example the Thompson girls had set. Local businesses started supporting the community center program with donations and volunteer hours. The story of the triplets had become a catalyst for broader community engagement, demonstrating how individual acts of kindness could inspire collective action. But perhaps the most significant development came when Jessica approached Marcus with an idea that would formalize their unconventional family arrangement in a way that could help other families facing similar challenges. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened," Jessica said during one of their regular Sunday dinners, Lily sleeping contentedly in her carrier while the girls cleared dishes around them. "How many other single parents are out there, struggling without support systems? How many kids need the kind of mentoring your daughters provide naturally?" Her proposal was ambitious: create a non-profit organization that would connect families in crisis with families willing to provide support, whether temporary or long-term. The model would be based on their own experience, flexible arrangements that honored biological relationships while creating extended family networks for people who needed them. "We could call it the Bridge Family Foundation," Jessica suggested, "because that's what we've built, bridges between people who need help and people who can provide it." Marcus was intrigued, but cautious. "It's a beautiful idea, but starting a non-profit is complicated. There would be legal issues, funding challenges, administrative responsibilities." "I know," Jessica acknowledged, "but look at what we've accomplished just by being willing to help each other. Imagine if we could facilitate that kind of connection for other families." The conversation continued over several weeks, with input from Sarah Chen, who had remained involved as both Lily's caseworker and an informal advisor to their family. Sarah had seen firsthand how rare and valuable their arrangement was, how much both Jessica and the Thompsons had benefited from their willingness to maintain connections rather than accepting separation as inevitable. The traditional foster care system often treats placement as either temporary or permanent, Sarah explained during a meeting at Marcus's kitchen table. But families are more complex than that. Sometimes what people need is something in between: ongoing connections, flexible support, relationships that can evolve as circumstances change. The idea gained momentum when Dr. Foster expressed interest in providing medical consulting for the proposed foundation, and Detective Walsh offered to help develop screening procedures that would ensure safety while facilitating meaningful connections between families. As summer progressed, the informal network that had grown around their family began to take more concrete shape. Parents from the community center program volunteered to serve on an advisory board. Local businesses pledged financial support. The hospital administration offered to provide meeting space and administrative assistance. The girls embraced the project with characteristic enthusiasm, understanding that their experience with Lily had become something larger than their individual family story. They helped design promotional materials, participated in community presentations, and continued their volunteer work with renewed purpose. "We're not just helping kids anymore," Emma explained to her class during a presentation about community service. "We're helping families figure out how to help each other." Isabella had developed a particular interest in the organizational aspects of the foundation, creating detailed charts and systems for tracking family connections and measuring program success. Her attention to detail had evolved into genuine project management skills that impressed the adults working on the initiative. Sophia focused on the emotional support aspects, helping to develop training materials for families who wanted to participate, but weren't sure how to navigate the complex feelings involved in extended family relationships. By late summer, the Bridge Family Foundation had received preliminary approval as a non-profit organization, with Marcus serving as executive director and Jessica as program coordinator. Their first official placement would be helping a teenage mother maintain custody of her infant while living with a host family who could provide both practical support and mentoring. A year ago, Marcus reflected during the Foundation's first board meeting, held in his living room with Lily playing contentedly on the floor, surrounded by her 4 devoted siblings. "I thought I was raising 3 daughters in a pretty predictable life. Now we're running a non-profit that's trying to change how families support each other." The transformation had been gradual but profound. What had begun as an emergency response to finding an abandoned baby had evolved into a new understanding of what family could mean, how communities could function, and what became possible when people chose to help rather than simply hoping someone else would handle difficult situations. The triplets had grown from children who performed one remarkable act of kindness into young people who understood their capacity to create positive change in the world around them. Their willingness to care for Lily had taught them that helping others wasn't just about solving immediate problems, but about building relationships and systems that could prevent crises and support resilience over time. The first major test of their unconventional family arrangement came on a rainy Thursday evening in September, nearly 6 months after the girls had found Lily. Marcus was reviewing foundation paperwork when his phone rang with Jessica's number, but instead of her familiar voice, he heard crying and what sounded like chaos in the background. "Marcus," Jessica's voice was strained and barely audible. "I need help. Lily's been crying for 3 hours straight, and I can't figure out what's wrong. I've tried everything, feeding, changing, rocking, singing. Nothing works, and I'm starting to panic." Marcus could hear Lily's distressed wails through the phone, the kind of inconsolable crying that could drive even experienced parents to desperation. "We'll be right over," he told Jessica, already reaching for his car keys. "Girls, grab your coats. Lily needs us." The scene at Jessica's apartment was heartbreaking. Jessica looked exhausted and overwhelmed, her hair disheveled and her eyes red from crying along with Lily. The baby was clearly in distress, her face flushed and her tiny fists clenched as she wailed with the intensity that only infants can sustain. Emma immediately took charge, gently lifting Lily from Jessica's arms and beginning the systematic approach to infant care that she'd perfected over months of experience. "When did this start?" she asked Jessica, her 8-year-old voice remarkably calm and professional. "Right after her evening feeding," Jessica replied, collapsing onto her couch with exhaustion. "She ate normally. I burped her, put her down for her nap, and then she just started screaming. I thought maybe she had gas, but nothing I tried helped." Isabella was already examining Lily with the methodical attention she brought to solving any problem, Her diaper's dry, she doesn't feel warm, and she's not arching her back like when she has stomach pain, she reported. But look at her hands. She keeps putting them near her ears. Sophia, meanwhile, had moved to comfort Jessica, recognizing that the stressed caregiver needed attention too. "It's okay," she said gently, sitting beside Jessica and offering the kind of emotional support that had become second nature to her. "Babies cry sometimes for reasons we can't figure out. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong." Marcus watched his daughters respond to the crisis with remarkable maturity, each applying their individual strengths to help both Lily and Jessica. But he was also concerned about the toll this level of responsibility was taking on children, who should have been worried about homework and playground friendships, not infant care emergencies. Dr. Foster arrived within 20 minutes of Marcus's call, having established an informal on-call arrangement for situations exactly like this. 1. Her examination revealed what Isabella had suspected. Lily was developing her first ear infection, a common but painful condition that could cause the kind of inconsolable crying they'd been experiencing. "It's not serious," Dr. Foster assured Jessica as she prescribed antibiotics and pain relief drops. "But ear infections are miserable for babies because they can't understand why they hurt or how to get relief. She should start feeling better within 24 hours of starting the medication." The immediate crisis was resolved, but the evening had revealed cracks in their arrangement that no one had anticipated. Jessica's confidence as a new parent had been shaken by her inability to identify and address Lily's distress. The triplets had responded to the emergency with competence that was both impressive and concerning. They were shouldering responsibilities that seemed beyond their years. "I felt so helpless," Jessica confided to Marcus after the girls had successfully soothed Lily to sleep and were quietly cleaning up the apartment. "For 3 hours I couldn't help my own sister. What kind of mother does that make me?" "It makes you a normal parent," Marcus replied honestly. "Every parent has moments when they can't figure out what their child needs. It doesn't mean you're failing, it means you're human." But the conversation that followed was more difficult. Jessica had been struggling with aspects of single parenthood that she'd been reluctant to discuss, afraid that admitting difficulties might jeopardize her custody of Lily or disappoint the people who had supported her journey. Working full-time at the hospital while caring for an infant was exhausting. The isolation of being the sole decision-maker for another person's welfare was overwhelming. The financial pressures of supporting a child on a single income were constant sources of stress. "I love Lily more than anything," Jessica said, her voice breaking, "but I'm not sure I'm giving her the life she deserves. Maybe she would be better off with a family that has more stability, more resources, more experience." The admission hung in the air like a confession, revealing the depth of Jessica's self-doubt and the weight of responsibility she'd been carrying alone. Marcus recognized the feelings. He'd experienced similar moments of inadequacy during his early years as a single father, wondering if his daughters would be better off with more traditional family arrangements. Emma, who had been listening from the kitchen where she was washing bottles, spoke up with the directness that characterized her approach to important conversations. "Jessica, do you remember what you told us when you first came to get Lily? You said family was about people who help each other when things get hard." "That's right," Sophia added, joining the conversation with her characteristic empathy. "Needing help doesn't mean you're not a good mom. It means you're smart enough to ask for what Lily needs." Isabella, ever the problem solver, had been thinking about practical solutions. What if we changed our arrangement? What if instead of just helping sometimes, we became more like co-parents? Jessica could keep custody, but we could share more of the daily responsibilities. The suggestion was bold, proposing a level of integration that would blur traditional boundaries between nuclear families and extended support networks. But as Marcus considered the idea. He realized it might address everyone's needs more effectively than their current arrangement. What would that look like practically? Marcus asked, his engineer's mind already working through logistics and implications. The conversation that followed lasted well past the girls' usual bedtime, but the topic was too important to postpone. They discussed shared custody schedules that would give Jessica the support she needed while maintaining her role as Lily's primary parent. They talked about financial arrangements that would distribute the costs of child-rearing without creating dependence or resentment. Most importantly, they addressed the emotional aspects of their unusual family structure, acknowledging that all of them, adults and children, were navigating relationships that didn't fit conventional categories. "The truth is," Marcus said as they finalized, "a preliminary agreement. We've all become so invested in Lily's welfare that trying to maintain artificial boundaries doesn't serve anyone well. If we're going to function as an extended family, we might as well do it intentionally and effectively." The new arrangement that emerged was unprecedented in Marcus's experience, but it felt natural given everything they'd been through together. Jessica would maintain legal custody and primary residence with Lily, but the Thompson family would provide regular childcare, financial support, and shared decision-making for major issues. The girls would continue their roles as big sisters, but with more structured responsibilities and clearer boundaries about what was appropriate for children their age. Marcus would serve as a co-parenting partner to Jessica, offering the kind of support and backup that two-parent families took for granted. "It's like we're creating a new kind of family," Emma observed as they walked home that evening. Lily finally, sleeping peacefully in her carrier. Not adopted, not foster care, not traditional relatives, but something that works for all of us. The next few weeks required significant adjustments as they implemented their new arrangement. There were scheduling conflicts to navigate, financial details to work out, and moments when the complexity of their relationships created confusion or tension. But there were also breakthrough moments that validated their decision. Jessica's confidence as a parent improved dramatically when she had consistent backup and support. The girls thrived with clearer roles and expectations. Marcus discovered that co-parenting with someone who shared his values and commitment created a family dynamic that was richer and more resilient than what he'd been managing alone. The Bridge Family Foundation benefited from their evolving arrangement as well, providing a real-world example of how flexible family structures could address the needs of both children and adults in crisis situations. "What we're doing isn't perfect," Jessica reflected during one of their weekly family dinners, now held alternately at both households. "But it's working. Lily is thriving, the girls are happy, and everyone feels supported rather than overwhelmed." Marcus nodded, watching Lily laugh at silly faces Sophia was making while Emma helped clear dishes and Isabella organized the toys scattered around the living room. This wasn't the family structure he'd planned or expected, but it was the family they'd chosen to create together, and it was proving to be exactly what all of them needed. 1 year after the triplets found Lily in the woods behind Cedar Falls, elementary, their story had traveled far beyond their small Ohio town. The local newspaper article about their rescue had been picked up by regional outlets, then national news networks, and eventually by a documentary filmmaker who was creating a series about modern American families and the ways communities respond to crisis. Marcus first learned about the broader attention when he received a call from the Ohio governor's office, informing him that Emma, Sophia, and Isabella had been selected as recipients of the state's Young Heroes Award, recognizing children who had made significant contributions to their communities through acts of courage and compassion. The ceremony will be at the State House in Columbus, the governor's aide explained. The girls will receive their awards at a special ceremony, and there will be media coverage highlighting their story and the foundation they've helped establish. The triplets' reaction to the news was characteristically varied. Emma was excited about the recognition, but more interested in the opportunity to talk about the Bridge Family Foundation and encourage other communities to develop similar programs. Sophia worried about speaking in public, but was pleased that their story might inspire other children to help people in need. Isabella was fascinated by the logistics of the ceremony and immediately began researching the State House and planning what she wanted to say if given the opportunity to speak. Jessica's response was more complex. The attention meant that Lily's story, her abandonment, her mother's death, the circumstances that had led to her rescue, would become more public than she had anticipated. There were privacy concerns, worries about how the publicity might affect Lily as she grew older, and questions about whether this level of exposure was in everyone's best interests. "I want people to know about the good that came from our situation," Jessica told Marcus as they discussed the upcoming ceremony. "But I also want to protect Lily's right to privacy about her early life. She should get to decide how much of her story she wants to share when she's old enough to make that choice." The solution they developed involved carefully controlling the narrative, focusing on the Thompson family's response and the community initiatives that had emerged, rather than on the specific details of Lily's abandonment. Jessica would participate in the ceremony, but with clear boundaries about what aspects of their story would be shared publicly. The weeks leading up to the ceremony were filled with preparation and reflection. The girls worked with a speech coach to prepare remarks about their experience and the lessons they'd learned about helping others. Marcus found himself thinking deeply about how their journey had changed his understanding of family, community responsibility, and the unexpected ways that crisis could become opportunity. The Bridge Family Foundation, meanwhile, had expanded. Beyond anyone's initial expectations, they were now serving 12 families in various arrangements, some temporary, some long-term, all designed to provide support networks for people facing challenges that traditional social services couldn't adequately address. Maria Santos had become the Foundation's program director, bringing her experience from the community center and her natural ability to connect families with compatible values and complementary needs. Dr. Foster served as medical advisor, ensuring that all placements considered health and safety factors. Detective Walsh helped develop screening procedures that protected vulnerable people while facilitating meaningful connections. What started with 3 little girls making a compassionate choice has become a model that other communities are starting to replicate, Maria reported during a Foundation board meeting held in Marcus's living room, with Lily playing contentedly among her collection of toys while the adults discussed program expansion. The day of the awards ceremony was clear and bright, with autumn leaves painting Columbus in brilliant colors. The triplets wore matching blue dresses that Jessica had helped them select, their hair carefully braided by Marcus, who had learned more about hairstyling in the past year than he'd ever expected to need. Lily, now a toddler with dark curls and bright brown eyes, accompanied them in an outfit that coordinated with her big sisters, clearly understanding that this was a special occasion even if she couldn't comprehend its significance. The State House ceremony was more elaborate than any of them had anticipated. The girls were among 6 young people being honored, and their story was featured prominently in the program materials and media coverage. Governor Patricia Williams spoke eloquently about the importance of young people who demonstrate leadership and compassion, using the Thompson triplets as an example of how individual actions could create lasting positive change. When Emma stepped up to the podium to accept the award on behalf of all 3 sisters, Her voice was clear and confident as she delivered the speech they'd prepared together. "A year ago, we were just 3 kids walking home from school," she began. "We found a baby who needed help, and we did what anyone should do. We brought her somewhere safe. But what happened next taught us that helping someone isn't just about solving their immediate problem. It's about building relationships and creating support systems that help everyone involved." She paused to look at her sisters, at Marcus and Jessica, sitting in the front row with Lily on Jessica's lap, at the audience filled with strangers who had come to hear their story. "Our family looks different now than it did a year ago, but it's stronger and happier. We learned that family isn't just about who you're related to. It's about who chooses to love and support each other. And we learned that when communities work together to help families in crisis, everyone benefits." The applause was sustained and heartfelt, but Emma wasn't finished. "The most important thing we want people to know is that anyone can make a difference. You don't have to be special or have special training. You just have to be willing to help when you see someone who needs it." Isabella stepped forward to add her contribution to the speech. "We started the Bridge Family Foundation because we realized there are lots of families who need support and lots of families who are willing to help. Sometimes all people need is someone to connect them with each other." Sophia concluded their presentation with characteristic empathy. "If you see someone who needs help, especially if it's a child or a family in crisis, please don't assume someone else will take care of it. Sometimes you might be the only person who notices, and your willingness to help could change everything." The media coverage that followed was extensive but respectful, focusing on the positive outcomes and community response rather than sensationalizing the dramatic aspects of Lily's rescue. Several other states expressed interest in developing similar programs based on the Bridge Family Foundation model. The documentary that had brought their story to national attention premiered 6 months later, but by then the Thompson family had returned to their normal routines, their lives enriched by their expanded family, but no longer defined by the crisis that had brought them together. Lily was walking now, chattering in the mixture of English and Spanish that reflected her multicultural upbringing, clearly secure in her identity as the beloved little sister of 3 devoted girls and the cherished daughter of Jessica, with Marcus serving as a father figure who provided stability and support without diminishing Jessica's primary role as parent. The triplets, now 9 years old, had maintained their commitment to community service while also pursuing their individual interests. Emma had joined the school's student council and was organizing a peer tutoring program. Sophia was taking piano lessons and performing at nursing homes and community events. Isabella had developed a fascination with marine biology and was planning a science fair project about ocean conservation. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if we'd walked past that tree without investigating," Isabella said one evening as the family worked together to prepare dinner. Lily helping by sitting in her high chair and providing commentary on their cooking efforts. "But you didn't walk past," Jessica replied, lifting Lily out of her chair and giving her a piece of bread to keep her occupied. "You noticed someone who needed help, and you chose to provide it. That choice changed all of our lives for the better." Marcus looked around his kitchen, now organized to accommodate the needs of 5 children ranging in age from toddler to elementary school, filled with the comfortable chaos of a large family preparing to share a meal. The refrigerator was covered with artwork, school papers, and photos documenting their unconventional but loving family structure. "The best part," he said, watching his daughters interact with their little sister with patience and genuine affection, "is that we've proven family can be whatever you need it to be, as long as everyone is committed to taking care of each other. The Bridge Family Foundation continued to grow, serving families throughout Ohio and expanding into neighboring states. But for the Thompson family, the most important outcome was much simpler. They had learned that love multiplies rather than divides when shared generously, and that the most meaningful families are often the ones you choose to create rather than the ones you inherit. 2 years after that life-changing Tuesday afternoon, the Thompson family gathered in their backyard for what had become an annual tradition, Lily's Found Day celebration, marking the anniversary of when the triplets discovered her in the woods behind Cedar Falls Elementary. The October air was crisp and golden, with leaves scattered across the lawn, where a small group of extended family and friends had assembled to commemorate not just Lily's rescue, but the transformation it had brought to all their lives. Lily, now a confident 2-year-old with Jessica's dark eyes and an independent spirit that reminded everyone of the triplets at that age, toddled between her big sisters with the fearless enthusiasm of a child who had never known anything but unconditional love and security. She spoke in full sentences now, switching effortlessly between English and the Spanish phrases Jessica had been teaching her, calling Marcus Papa Marcus and the triplets by names she'd created herself, So-So, and Bell, Fa. Backyard gathering included faces that had become central to their story over the past 2 years. Dr. Foster was there with her own family, having developed friendships that extended well beyond professional relationships. Detective Walsh had brought her teenage daughter, who was volunteering with the Bridge Family Foundation's Youth Mentorship Program. Sarah Chen, from Child Protective Services, attended with her husband and twin boys, representing the official systems that had facilitated their unconventional family arrangement. Maria Santos from the Community Center had organized the potluck aspect of the celebration, coordinating contributions from the dozens of families who had been touched by the Foundation's work. The long tables set up under the maple trees held dishes representing the cultural diversity of Cedar Falls: Mexican rice from Jessica's heritage, Italian pasta salad from the Rossi family they'd helped reunite with their grandmother, Korean, bulgogi from the Park family, whose teenage daughter had found stability through their host family program. 2 years ago, none of us could have imagined this, Marcus reflected as he surveyed the gathering, watching Emma help organize games for the younger children, while Sophia led a group in singing songs that included lyrics in 3 different languages. Isabella was documenting the event with the thoroughness she brought to everything important, creating what she called historical records for their family archives. Jessica, now settled into her role as both Lily's mother and an integral part of the extended Thompson family, was helping Marcus coordinate the logistics of feeding 30 people in their backyard. She'd completed her master's degree in pediatric nursing the previous spring and had been promoted to shift supervisor at Cedar Falls Regional Hospital, a position that provided both financial stability and the kind of meaningful work that fed her soul. "The most amazing thing," Jessica said, arranging photographs on a display board that showed Lily's growth over the past 2 years, "is how natural this all feels now. When I first walked into your house that day, I was so scared that I was taking Lily away from people who loved her. Now I can't imagine any of us existing separately." The evolution of their family structure had required constant communication, flexibility, and a willingness to prioritize relationships over conventional expectations. Marcus and Jessica had developed a co-parenting partnership that worked because they shared the same values and commitment to putting the children's needs first. The girls had grown into their roles as big sisters with grace and maturity, learning to balance their own childhood needs with their genuine desire to help care. For Lily, the Bridge Family Foundation had become their most visible legacy, but it wasn't their most important one. That honor belonged to the lessons they'd learned and taught about what family could mean when people chose to love each other without regard for traditional boundaries or expectations. The foundation now operated in 6 states, with over 200 families participating in various support arrangements. They'd helped teenage mothers maintain custody of their children while receiving educational and emotional support from host families. They'd connected elderly people who needed assistance with families looking for grandparent figures for their children. They'd facilitated temporary placements that became permanent adoptions, and permanent placements that evolved into lifelong friendships even when legal relationships changed. "What we've learned," Emma explained to a reporter who was documenting the anniversary celebration for a follow-up story, "is that most people want to help others, but they don't always know how. The foundation helps connect people who need support with people who can provide it, and then we help them figure out what works best for everyone involved." The reporter, a young woman named Andrea Kim, who worked for a national magazine focused on social innovation, had been following their story since the State House ceremony. She was particularly interested in how the girls had maintained their academic and social development while taking on responsibilities that seemed beyond their years. "The key," Sophia told her, "is that we're not trying to be adults. We're just trying to be good big sisters and helpful community members. The grown-ups handle the grown-up decisions, but they listen to our ideas and let us be part of solutions when it's appropriate." Isabella had prepared statistics for the interview because she'd discovered that numbers often convinced adults when emotional arguments didn't. 93% of the families in our program report improved stability after 6 months, she reported with the precision she brought to all her research projects. 87% of the children in our host family arrangements show improved academic performance, and 100% of the families say they would recommend the program to others facing similar challenges. The afternoon celebration included a surprise that none of the Thompson family had anticipated. Governor Williams arrived unannounced, having driven down from Columbus to personally deliver news that the Bridge Family Foundation had been selected as Ohio's Model Community Program of the Year, with funding that would allow them to expand their services and provide training to other states interested in replicating their approach. What started with 3 little girls making a compassionate choice has become a statewide model for community-based family support, Governor Williams said in impromptu remarks to the gathered crowd. The Thompson family and their partners have demonstrated that innovative solutions to complex social problems often come from the ground up, from people who are willing to think creatively about how to help each other. The recognition was gratifying, but for Marcus, the real measure of their success was visible in much simpler ways. It was watching Lily play fearlessly with children who adored her, secure in the knowledge that she was surrounded by people who would always prioritize her well-being. It was seeing his daughters approach new challenges with confidence and empathy, understanding that they had the power to make positive differences in other people's lives. It was experiencing the deep satisfaction that came from building something meaningful with people who shared his values and commitment to service. As the celebration wound down and families began heading home, taking leftover food and promises to stay in touch, Marcus found himself cleaning up with the core group that had become his extended family. Jessica was putting a sleepy Lily down for her afternoon nap, while the triplets organized toys and folded chairs with the efficiency that came from years of shared responsibilities. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Emma said, as she stacked plates in the kitchen sink. "That day we found Lily, we were just walking home from school like we did every day. We had no idea that stopping to investigate a crying sound would change our entire lives." "Maybe that's the point," Isabella suggested, always ready to find deeper meaning in everyday events. Maybe the most important decisions we make are the ones where we don't have time to think about consequences. We just do what feels right. Sophia, who was wiping down the kitchen table with characteristic thoroughness, added her perspective. I think the important thing is that we were raised to notice when people need help and to believe that helping is always the right choice, even when it's complicated. Marcus paused in his dishwashing to really look at his daughters, these remarkable young people who had grown from children who performed one extraordinary act of kindness into individuals who understood their capacity to create positive change. In the world around them, they were still children in many ways, concerned about school assignments and playground friendships, and whether they could stay up late on weekends. But they were also young people with a sophisticated understanding of empathy, responsibility, and the ways that individual choices could have far-reaching consequences. "I'm proud of all of you," he told them, meaning it in ways that went far, beyond typical parental pride. "You've learned that caring for others isn't a burden, it's a privilege. You've shown that families can be created through choice and commitment, not just biology. And you've demonstrated that young people can be leaders in their communities when adults are willing to listen and support their ideas." As they finished cleaning up and prepared for the quiet evening routine that had become precious to all of them, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 2 years ago, he'd been a single father, focused primarily on providing stability and security for his 3 daughters. Today, he was part of an extended family that included Jessica and Lily, connected to a community network that spanned multiple states and involved in work that was making measurable differences in hundreds of lives. The transformation hadn't always been easy. There had been moments of doubt, logistical challenges, and emotional complications that required patience and creativity to navigate. But the rewards had exceeded anything he could have imagined when Emma first walked through their front door, carrying an abandoned baby and trusting that her father would know how to help. That evening, as he tucked the triplets into their beds and kissed Lily goodnight in the room that had once been his home office, Marcus felt profound gratitude for the unexpected path their lives had taken. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with a simple decision to stop and help someone who needs assistance, and end up revealing possibilities you never knew existed. The Thompson family had learned that love multiplies when shared generously, that families can be whatever you need them to be when everyone is committed to caring for each other, and that the most meaningful legacies are often built one act of kindness at a time. Outside, the autumn wind rustled through the maple trees where Lily had played safely all afternoon, surrounded by people who had chosen to love her not because they had to, but because love, once given freely, becomes the foundation for everything else that matters. 5 years after that October afternoon when 3 8-year-old girls discovered an abandoned baby, Emma, Sophia, and Isabella Thompson stood before their high school graduation class as co-valedictorians, preparing to deliver a joint commencement address that would reflect on the lessons they'd learned about service, family, and the power of individual choices to create lasting change. The auditorium at Cedar Falls High School was packed beyond capacity, filled not just with families celebrating their graduating seniors, but with members of the extended community who had been touched by the Thompson triplets' story over the years. In the front row sat Marcus, now graying at the temples, but with the same steady presence that had anchored his daughters through their remarkable journey. Beside him, Jessica held 7-year-old Lily, who was fidgeting with excitement in her best dress, eager to see her big sisters receive their diplomas. The transformation in all their lives over the past 5 years had been extraordinary, beyond anything any of them could have imagined that afternoon when the girls first walked through their front door, carrying an infant they'd found in the woods. The journey from that moment of childhood compassion to this celebration of academic achievement represented not just personal growth, but a fundamental shift in how an entire community understood family, responsibility, and the ways that individual actions could create lasting positive change. The triplets had grown from remarkable children into exceptional young adults, each pursuing different paths, but united by the values and experiences that had shaped their adolescence. Their academic achievements were impressive by any standard. All three had maintained perfect GPAs throughout high school, while balancing extensive community service, leadership roles, and their ongoing responsibilities as big sisters to Lily, and mentors to dozens of younger children through the Foundation's programs. Emma had been accepted to Stanford University with a full scholarship to study public policy and international relations, driven by her desire to create systemic changes that would help vulnerable families on a global scale. Her senior thesis on innovative foster care models had been published in a national social work journal, and she'd already been invited to speak at conferences about youth leadership in social justice initiatives. Despite her academic focus, Emma had never lost the hands-on leadership style that had made her such an effective advocate for Lily and the other children they'd helped over the years. Sophia was heading to Juilliard to study music therapy, having discovered her calling in using music to heal emotional trauma in children and families. She'd spent the past 2 years working with Dr. Foster to develop music therapy programs for pediatric patients at Cedar Falls Regional Hospital, creating original compositions specifically designed to help children process difficult medical experiences. Her college application portfolio included recordings of songs she'd written for Lily, for the children they'd mentored through the Foundation, and for families navigating the complex emotions of non-traditional family structures. Isabella had earned admission to MIT for marine biology and environmental science, her childhood fascination with ocean conservation having evolved into sophisticated research that had already gained national attention. Her high school independent study project on microplastic pollution had been presented at the National Science Fair, where she'd won first place in environmental science and used her acceptance speech to talk about the connections between environmental health and family stability. Her research had been funded by a grant from the National Science Foundation, making her one of the youngest recipients in the program's history. The Bridge Family Foundation had become a national model, operating in 18 states and serving over 1,000 families annually through programs that ranged from emergency placements to long-term support networks. What had begun as a local response to their family's unique situation had evolved into a comprehensive organization that addressed emergency family placements, long-term support networks for single parents, elderly companionship programs, youth mentorship initiatives, and educational support for families in transition. The Foundation's success had attracted attention from policymakers at the state and federal level. 3 states had incorporated their flexible family support model into official social services programs, and a pilot program based on their approach was being tested by the Department of Health and Human Services in 12 additional states. The Foundation had received grants totaling over $2 million, allowing them to hire professional staff, conduct research on program effectiveness, and provide training to social workers and community organizations nationwide. Jessica had completed her doctoral degree in nursing and family systems, writing her dissertation on innovative support models for non-traditional families. She now served as the Foundation's Chief Program Officer, traveling nationwide to train social workers, medical professionals, and community leaders in implementing flexible family support systems. Her expertise was sought by universities, government, agencies, and international organizations working on family stability initiatives. She'd been invited to speak at conferences in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia about their model, and was currently working on a book about community-based approaches to family crisis intervention. Despite her professional success, Jessica's most important role remained being Lily's mother and an integral part of the Thompson family. The co-parenting arrangement she'd developed with Marcus had evolved into something that social workers often used as an example of how non-traditional family structures could provide exceptional stability and support for children. Lily had never known anything but security, love, and the certainty that she was wanted and cherished by multiple adults who coordinated their care to ensure her needs were always met. Lily had grown into a confident bilingual 7-year-old who spoke with equal fluency about marine biology, Isabella's influence, social justice, Emma's passion, music theory, Sophia's gift, and nursing science, Jessica's profession. She attended the same elementary school where her sisters had been students when they found her, and her teachers often remarked on her unusual combination of independence and empathy, traits that clearly reflected her unique upbringing in a family built on choice rather than circumstance. The little girl, who had been abandoned as an infant, had become a secure, articulate child who understood her own story and took pride in the family that had formed around her rescue. She could explain to curious classmates that she had been adopted by her biological aunt, but was also part of the Thompson family, that she had 4 parents who all loved her, and that families could look different while being equally strong and supportive. As Emma approached the podium to begin their graduation address, she looked out at an audience that represented the community they'd helped build over the past 5 years. Dr. Foster was there with her family, having become not just their pediatrician, but a close family friend whose own children had grown up playing with Lily. Detective Walsh, now retired, served on the Foundation's board and had brought her granddaughter, who was starting kindergarten in the fall. Maria Santos sat with dozens of families who had participated in Foundation programs, creating a visible representation of the network of support and connection that had grown from one act of childhood compassion. Sarah Chen, from Child Protective Services, was in attendance with her family, representing the official systems that had facilitated their unconventional arrangement and continued to refer families to their programs. Representatives from the 3 universities the triplets would be attending had come to Cedar Falls specifically for this graduation, recognizing that these young people represented something unique in higher education, students who had already demonstrated their capacity to create meaningful change in the world. "When we were 8 years old," Emma began, her voice clear and confident, carrying easily through the auditorium's sound system, "we thought we were just helping one baby who needed assistance. We had no idea that choosing to help someone in crisis would teach us everything we needed to know about building meaningful lives and creating positive change in our communities." She paused to look at her sisters, standing beside her at the podium in matching blue graduation gowns. Then at her family in the front row. Lily waved enthusiastically and Emma smiled before continuing. "Over the past 5 years, we've learned that the most important education doesn't always happen in classrooms, though we're grateful for our excellent teachers and the academic preparation we've received here at Cedar Falls High School. The education that has shaped who we are as people happened when we chose to pay attention to someone who needed help, when we were willing to expand our definition of family to include people who shared our values, and when we understood that solving complex problems requires creativity, persistence, and the willingness to work with others who care about the same things you do." The audience was completely silent, recognizing that they were hearing something more substantial than typical graduation remarks. These young people were sharing insights gained through years of real-world experience, with issues that many adults found challenging to navigate. Sophia stepped forward to continue their address, her voice carrying the warm, musical quality that had made her such an effective counselor for younger children struggling with family transitions. Music has taught me that harmony doesn't require everyone to sing the same note. It requires people to listen carefully to each other and find ways to blend their individual voices into something more beautiful than any of them could create alone. That's what we learned about family. It's not about everyone being the same, but about everyone being committed to creating something beautiful together. She gestured toward their family in the front row, where Marcus and Jessica sat with Lily between them, the picture of a family that had been created through choice and commitment rather than conventional expectations. Our family looks different from traditional families, and that's taught us that love and stability don't depend on conforming to expected patterns. They depend on people choosing to show up for each other consistently, to communicate honestly about needs and boundaries, and to prioritize the well-being of everyone involved, especially the children who depend on adults to create safe, nurturing environments. Isabella took her turn at the podium, her voice carrying the quiet authority she'd developed through years of research and careful observation of both scientific phenomena and human behavior. Science has taught me that small changes can have enormous consequences over time. In ecology, we call this concept sensitive dependence on initial conditions, the idea that minor variations in the starting state of a system can lead to dramatically different outcomes. One decision to stop and investigate a crying sound in the woods led to changes that affected hundreds of families across multiple states, created new models for social services, and influenced policy discussions at the national level. She looked directly at Lily, who was listening with the serious attention she brought to conversations about science. Individual actions create ripple effects that extend far beyond what we can predict or control. When we found Lily, we thought we were solving one problem for one baby. We didn't know we were starting a process that would lead to the creation of support systems for thousands of families, or that our experience would become a model studied by universities and government agencies. Emma returned to the podium for their conclusion, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had learned to speak effectively to audiences ranging from elementary school children to state legislators. As we leave Cedar Falls for college, we're not just grateful for our education or excited about our futures. We're carrying forward the understanding that wherever we go, whatever careers we pursue, our most important job will always be to notice people who need help and to choose to provide it, even when it's complicated or inconvenient. The audience began to applaud, but Emma held up her hand to indicate they weren't finished. We want to be clear about something important. We didn't accomplish anything extraordinary because we were special children with unusual abilities. We accomplished what we did because we were raised by a father who taught us that helping others is always the right choice, and because we were supported by a community that believes in the importance of taking care of each other. Sophia stepped forward one final time, her voice filled with emotion as she prepared to introduce the person who represented everything they'd learned about resilience, love, and the power of community support. Before we conclude, we want to introduce someone who represents everything we've learned about courage, resilience, and the power of love to transform difficult circumstances into opportunities for growth. Someone who has taught us as much as we've taught her, and who reminds us every day that the most meaningful families are built through choice and commitment. She gestured toward the front row, where Jessica was helping Lily stand on her chair, so the audience could see her clearly. "This is our sister, Lily Martinez Thompson," Isabella announced, using the hyphenated name they'd chosen to reflect both her biological heritage and her chosen family. 7 years ago, she was an abandoned baby whose future was uncertain. Today, she's a confident young person who speaks 3 languages, plays 2 musical instruments, can identify 50 species of marine life, understands basic principles of social justice, and knows that families are built through love and commitment rather than genetics alone. The applause was thunderous as Lily, never shy about attention, waved to the crowd with the poise of someone who had grown up surrounded by people who celebrated her existence and supported her dreams. She had been coached for this moment, understanding that she was representing not just herself, but all the children who had been helped by their family's work over the years. Lily represents the best possible outcome when communities choose to support families in crisis rather than simply hoping someone else will handle difficult situations, Emma concluded, her voice strong and clear as she delivered the final message. They wanted to leave with their community. She's living proof that love multiplies when it's shared generously, and that the most important families are often the ones we choose to create. She's also proof that children who are given love, stability, and opportunity can thrive regardless of how difficult their beginning might have been. The standing ovation that followed lasted for several minutes, with the audience recognizing that they had witnessed something more significant than a graduation speech. They had heard a testament to the power of individual choices to create lasting change, delivered by young people who had spent their teenage years demonstrating those principles through their actions. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the Thompson House, where the backyard that had hosted annual Found Day gatherings was now decorated for a graduation party that brought together 5 years' worth of extended family and friends. The same maple trees that had witnessed their early family meetings now provided shade for tables laden with food representing the cultural diversity of their community network. The guest list read like a directory of everyone who had been touched by their story over the years. Families who had been connected through foundation programs mingled with teachers, medical professionals, social workers, and community leaders who had supported their work. Children who had been mentored by the triplets played with Lily and the other young people who represented the next generation of community-minded citizens. Marcus found himself standing at the edge of the gathering, watching his daughters interact with the dozens of people who had become part of their story. Emma was deep in conversation with a family they'd helped connect with adoption services 3 years earlier. Their adopted daughter, now a thriving middle schooler, who credited the triplets with teaching her that families could be created through choice. Sophia was playing guitar with a group of teenagers from the Foundation's youth mentorship program, leading them in songs she'd written about resilience and hope. Isabella was showing Lily and several younger children how to identify different types of leaves, turning the backyard into an impromptu nature classroom. Jessica appeared beside him, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade and wearing the contented expression of someone who had found her place in the world and built a life that aligned with her deepest values. "Hard to believe it's been 9 years since that day," she said, referring not to graduation, but to the October afternoon that had changed all their lives. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Marcus replied, watching as Lily demonstrated to younger children how to make paper airplanes, her patient teaching style clearly inherited from her big sisters. "Sometimes it feels like we've always been a family of 5, like this was always the plan." They stood together in comfortable silence, observing the celebration that represented not just academic achievement, but the culmination of years of work to build something meaningful and lasting. The Bridge Family Foundation had provided structure and purpose to their community work, but moments like these reminded them that their most important achievement was much simpler. They'd created a family where everyone belonged, where everyone was valued, and where everyone understood their responsibility to care for each other. As the evening wound down and guests began heading home, carrying leftover food and promises to stay connected as the triplets headed off to college, the core family gathered on the back porch for their traditional end-of-celebration reflection. It was a ritual they'd developed over the years, taking time to acknowledge what they'd learned and what they hoped to carry forward into whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. "What are you most proud of?" Marcus asked, the question that always began their reflection time, though tonight the question carried additional weight as they prepared for the first major separation in their family's history. "That we never stopped believing in the importance of helping people," Emma said immediately, her voice carrying the conviction that had made her such an effective advocate throughout her teenage years. Even when it got complicated or required sacrifices, even when people questioned our choices or suggested we were taking on too much responsibility, we never decided it was too hard or not worth the effort. That we learned to be a family without losing our individual identities, Sophia added, her characteristic empathy evident as she considered how their relationships had evolved over the years. "We all became better people because of our relationships with each other, but we didn't have to become the same person or give up the things that made us unique." Isabella's response was characteristically thoughtful, reflecting the analytical mind that had made her such an effective researcher and program evaluator. "That we proved love isn't a limited resource. The more we shared it, the more we had. Taking care of Lily didn't make us love each other less. It made us love everyone more, and helping other families didn't diminish our own family bonds. It strengthened them by giving us shared purpose and meaning." Jessica's voice was soft with emotion when she spoke, her words carrying the weight of someone who had experienced profound transformation through unexpected relationships. "That you taught me what family really means. I thought family was just about biology and obligation, people you were stuck with whether you liked them or not. But you showed me it's about choice and commitment and showing up for each other every single day, especially when things are difficult." Lily, who had been listening with the serious attention she brought to important conversations, surprised everyone by speaking up with the thoughtfulness that had become characteristic of her. "Approach to family discussions. I'm proud that we help other families find each other, like you helped me find my family. And I'm proud that even though Emma and Sophia and Isabella are going to college, we're still going to be sisters forever." Marcus felt his throat tighten as he looked around the porch at these 5 extraordinary people who had become his world, who had taught him lessons about love, resilience, and community that he never could have learned any other way. "I'm proud that we chose love over fear every single time," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt. "When we had the choice between protecting ourselves and helping others, we chose to help. When we had the choice between conventional expectations and what felt right for our family, we chose what felt right. When we had the choice between keeping our blessings to ourselves and sharing them with our community, we chose to share. And most importantly, when we had the choice between letting circumstances divide us and working together to create something beautiful, we chose to work together." As they prepared to go inside, Lily sleepy in Jessica's arms, and the triplets tired from their long graduation day but energized by the recognition they'd received and the opportunities that lay ahead, Marcus took one last look at the backyard, where so many important conversations had taken place, where so many celebrations had been held, where they'd learned that the most meaningful legacies are built through daily acts of kindness and the willingness to expand your definition of family to include anyone who needs belonging. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the triplets prepared for college and adult responsibilities. Emma would head to California to study policy and international relations, preparing for a career in public service that would take her far from Cedar Falls, but never far from the values she'd learned at home. Sophia would move to New York to study music therapy, developing skills that would allow her to heal trauma and bring joy to people facing difficult circumstances. Isabella would go to Boston to study marine biology and environmental science, working to address global challenges that required the same kind of innovative thinking she'd applied to family and community problems. The Bridge Family Foundation would continue growing and serving families across the country, with Jessica providing leadership and the triplets contributing remotely while they pursued their education. New families would find support and connection through programs that had been tested and refined through years of experience. Lily would continue developing into the remarkable person she was becoming, supported by a network of people who had chosen to love her and guided by sisters who would always prioritize her well-being regardless of geographical distance. But tonight, they were simply a family of 5, grateful for the journey that had brought them together and committed to carrying forward the lessons they'd learned about courage, compassion, and the extraordinary things that become possible when ordinary people choose to help each other. The story that had begun with 3 8-year-old girls hearing a baby cry in the woods had become a testament to the power of individual choices to create lasting change, one act of kindness at a time. It was a story about the families we inherit and the families we choose, about the communities we're born into and the communities we help create, and about the ways that love, when shared generously and without condition, becomes the foundation for everything else that matters in life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.